All right. Hello and welcome to the ManageIQ Sprint 27 demo report. Next slide. The sprint just ended on Monday, and as usual, we have the sprint demo 2 days later. So I'll be talking about the statistics from the sprint. Greg Blomquist is going to give us an update on the providers. Dan's going to give us an update on the user interface. Jason's going to give us an update on the SelfService UI. Madhu's going to talk about automate. Greg McCullough is going to talk about provisioning. Alberto about the REST API. Greg Tanzillo about the Appliance core. And Rich will speak about the developer setup that he got going. Next slide, please. All right, so this was a pretty typical sprint, typical of the many that we've had this year. Almost 200 pull requests merged, 63 labeled as bugs, and then a kind of a very equal divide between 32 enhancements, 32 technical debt, 32 refactoring. 14 were just test fixes, 3 were focused on performance improvements, and 21 pull requests had various gem changes. Next slide, please. All right, so ever since the reroute from, I believe it was last sprint, where the ManageIQ repo was rooted like a regular Rails application, we were able to add in Gymnasium, which gives us an indication of all the gems that we use and whether they're outdated or not, and whether any of them have vulnerabilities. So the vulnerabilities would be in red, the outdated ones would be in yellow, and the green or green. I don't know why, but the last couple of days the numbers keep changing. So these numbers were from last night. And when I looked this morning, the numbers are just even the total count is significantly different. So I don't know if Gymnasium is changing things or what's going on. But anyway, it's 120 are green. Were green last time we looked, and 41 are yellow. And if I look this morning, it's 45 are green and 17 are yellow, which was probably the count that I was used to more. So we'll keep monitoring that and seeing if there's any more weirdness in Gymnasium. Next slide, please. All right, I'll turn it over to Greg to give us an update on providers.
All right, so I have a couple things to cover for the provider integration work this sprint. You could jump to the next slide. So we had a good number of pull requests come in from the containers and OpenStack integration teams, and there's still a really strong number of PRs outstanding that are waiting to be merged. This just keeps showing this, good interaction between our teams, which is really great. One of the important fixes that came in for OpenStack was fixing the way that we cache the OpenStack event monitors. This was actually causing a lot of problems when the AMQP connection was lost, and we could no longer pick up events from OpenStack. Once that would happen, we could never recover until the appliance was restarted. You would just never get events again. Now, every 5 minutes, we're reevaluating that cached connection and trying to determine if we can reconnect successfully and pick up events from OpenStack's AMQP service. So another set of important changes came from Dan Berger, who's working on the Microsoft SCVMM provider. He found 2 really good performance improvements for the SCVMM refresh. First off, he found that the get content PowerShell call was actually really memory hungry. And by eliminating that from when we do the refresh and actually call out to PowerShell for SCVMM, it had like a 40% improvement, I think, on memory. And also switching from REXML to Nokogiri has had a pretty dramatic improvement as well. So we have two really good improvements on the SCVMM side for refresh. Next slide. I'm going to hand it over to Matthew. Matthew Draper is going to give an update on the provider plugins work in terms of the provider namespacing he's been working on. And yeah, he's going to screen share.
Okay, so this is a progress update of our ongoing work to rename the provider classes. And we started the process here with quite a few files in app models. And over the last couple of sprints, we've moved out most of the providers. As you can see, they were previously quite spread out within the directory and in some cases elsewhere. They're now drawn together in a single directory each. As we progress, the root app models directory is left with only the generic base classes. So there's still quite a lot there, but there's less obvious duplication in the naming. We'll hopefully wrap up the final providers for Kubernetes and SCVMM in the next sprint, which will then allow us to move beyond the models and start addressing places where provider-specific behavior has leaked into the UI layer. And that's it.
All right, so there you go. Over to Dan to talk about some of the UI changes.
All right, thanks, Greg. So as usual, a lot of PRs merged from the UI team, 78 total, and then 27 of those were bugs. We did a lot of refactoring and technical debt on JavaScript in the JavaScript area, as well as putting in a lot of pattern fly replacement for CSS that we've had in there. A couple visual areas that we've seen changes in was we got done with replacing the combo and the calendar controls from DHTLMX. I've got some screens on that, and the container team actually got some updates in. I got a list from them that I can go through. Next. So with the combo controls, the top on top is the old DHTLMX one, and you can see there's a column next to it called selected. So as you would select those things, we had to visually put the selected ones on the right, whereas the new pattern fly control, as you select them, it shows up actually in the control. So we were able to eliminate that that other column, and the styling, it'll match everything else that we're doing. Next. The calendar control, actually the one on the left probably does look a little bit better, although it's missing its bottom. It has some styling issues, but the one on the right is more generic. That's because the control that we actually grabbed is the one that Patternfly is about to put in. I think actually, hopefully in the next release in a few weeks. And once that's in, then we'll restyle it, but it is totally functional. We didn't want to do ad hoc styling on it since it was going to be moved into Patternfly anyway, so that we can do Patternfly compatible styling on it once it's moved. So you'll see that actually start looking better shortly. Next. And this list I just got from the containers group. These are some of the significant things that were put in over this sprint. You can now tag container entities, and actually I think there was a bug where it wasn't filtering those, so we got that fix in there as well. The display name of a project they added. The route to the service relationship was added, so you can jump back to a service from the containers, and then they did some work to move to the Kubernetes version 1 API. And that's it on the UI side.
Okay, so in this sprint, Booz Allen Hamilton, who's one of our founding community partners, got the guts of their project Jellyfish transferred over to the ManageIQ repo. So it's officially part of the ManageIQ repo itself. That will be the basis for the self-service UI. So there's going to be a lot of work that's going to be going into that to try to essentially have two UIs, one for the admin and one for self-service. It's right now in the SPA UI root directory under self-service. One of the thoughts is that eventually there might be other single-page applications, such as maybe a different admin UI or perhaps some other UIs that we might think of. So we're kind of leaving that root directory as like a place where we can start hanging more of those. Right now, the self-service UI I don't think is functional. It's still written against the Jellyfish API, but the initial PR was to just kind of get all the code moved over, and then as the weeks progress, the Booz Allen guys are going to start, are going to get it more into a working state, and then we got to see how we can get it into the appliance and actually running. So thanks, Booz Allen team, and next slide.
Okay, for the automate, in this last sprint, we actually added support for multiple state machines. A state machine basically encapsulates a workflow, retries, and extra stuff like restartability at a certain state. Some of the use cases that we were able to handle with the new changes were reusability, because previously, if you had to use the state machine from somebody else, you had to copy the entire state machine into yours, and it becomes a nightmare, doing maintenance when you have 2 copies of state machines floating around. So one of the things that we have done is we have allowed users to define their own state machines in a modular fashion, which can be kept separately in a separate domain or a separate class, and just be called from your other state machines. So it allows you to compose state machines by using other state machines. Next slide, please. So all of the state machines, they run within a single automate workspace, and one state machine can call another state machine. It can nest as deep as we want. We haven't tried the limit, but we haven't enforced any sort of limit on how deep it can be. And any state machine in the hierarchy can actually issue a retry, and the entire process stops, and then I think when it resumes again at some point later on, it will actually start back at the right state machine that is being used, and it will start that particular state. And any state machine can actually cause an error, and that error is actually going to propagate all the way to the top, and it's actually going to stop the process from running. The variables in the workspace are accessible to all of the state machines. So if one state machine ended up creating a variable in the workspace, it can be reused or it can be accessed by the other state machines. Next slide, please. So this is a simple example of 3 state machines, one called the shopping, which is the key one, and it in turn calls 2 other state machines, the web server and the DB server. And each of these state machines, they have different steps inside of them. So in this particular scenario, you'd actually see that when the shopping state machine starts, it actually runs its first state. Then it actually, on the second line where it says test state machines, it invokes the web server state machine to go do whatever it wants to do. Then that comes back and it invokes the DB server state machine, and then it eventually finishes off with its last step 2. So next slide, please. So when all said and done, when the model in Automate actually looks like, you would have a nested structure of the top state machine calling the shopping one, calling the web server, and the web server, once that is done, it ends up actually calling the DB server, and this is how the process will look like. That's it. Any more questions on it? Or? Okay.
Nice job, Mehdi.
Next slide.
This is a nice job. Okay. So from provisioning, one of the enhancements we got in was being able to support the cloud tenants that we collect from OpenStack during inventory refresh. So it's created as a service, and you generate a service dialog for that. The generation has been updated to add a tenant field. The field's technically optional. It'll work the same way it's working today if you don't use it. Since we create the service dialogues, they can be post-edited, so you can delete that field if you don't need it. Since OpenStack does support taking CloudFormation templates, the fields added to those templates as well. So if you're deploying this simply to Amazon, you'd want to remove that field. And I think one thing to point out is it's a dynamic field, so to pull in the new method was added into Automate, you need to refresh that model. And I have the path there to where that exists. And obviously, if you need to extend that, you copy that method and modify it to your needs. And then at the bottom, just a quick screenshot showing the field added to the top portion of the options for any service dialog we create for these templates. That's really it. Okay, next slide.
All right, so for the REST API, we had a couple of enhancements that Tim was working on that got merged in, and they're related to the chargebacks and reports. So in this PR, these are queries, so the gets can be done on these. So for chargebacks and rates, there's a couple of primary collections. You'll see API chargebacks, API rates to query them all. And the third signature, you can get a specific chargeback and the related rates for it. So that's one. For reports, again, the reports is a primary collection. Query them all, query individual one. And if you want to see the results of a particular report that was run, it's the sub-collection results, and if you want a specific one there too. So again, for this PR, it's just the queries. Future PRs, we'll start adding things like running reports as an action and so forth. So, but that's the work by Tim. Great work, Tim. Other stuff, we have source refactoring. We had some code in app helpers. API helper, which had things like JSON rendering and error logging and normalization. We moved that to under the API controller, since that was only used by the REST API. And with the new features coming in, we bumped up the Semver to V210-pre, and that's it for the REST API. On to next slide, please.
Okay.
Greg?
So on the appliance side, we got 32 PRs merged this sprint. There's a lot of work that was done in Linux admin by Nick and Jason as well. So they've added system CTL support, so now you can natively start system CTL services through Linux admin tool. Also, the structure of the way the code is laid out internally has been improved so that there's a layer on top that sits on top of system CTL and service init services to automatically recognize what environment it's running in, and then seamlessly run the right command out the other end based on whether system CTL is installed on the appliance or not. Otherwise, it will just fall back to just calling service. We've also added support in the application for Postgres 9.4. This was a prerequisite for updating the appliance for 9.4, which is work is going on as we speak for that. And that should be done in next sprint. And one other thing that's pretty substantial is on the replication side. We've added resiliency to replication by adding a heartbeat to the child worker process. The child worker process in replication is the one that's actually doing the moving of the data to the global region, and that it's a sub-process of the worker itself, and there was no heartbeating. And this actually addresses a fairly serious issue that's been reported where the replication just suddenly stops replicating and the backlog just grows continuously until it gets restarted. So in this case, when heartbeat is detected, hasn't been done after a threshold, the default is 5 minutes, the main process will restart the child process, and replication should be able to pick up from where it left off. There's a little asterisk there because the PR for this one got merged late. It just got merged this morning. So it's not in last night's build, but it'll be in tonight's that we've done. So kind of spilled over from the sprint, but it's a pretty big change, and it's definitely worth talking about. That's it. Next slide.
As has been mentioned, our code base has now been rerouted. In the past, I had a facility to help developers, specifically running on the Mac, where they could run an appliance as a VM under Fusion and actually run the code that resides on the Mac, so they could do all their development and Git work on the Mac and test it on the appliance. Unfortunately, the rerouting broke that, so those scripts have been re-implemented, and as a result, they've been moved to their own repo, so we can version it with changes in the code. Formerly, they were in the guides repo, so the new scripts are in the repo listed, and there's a branch, just in case you need to test in the pre-rerouted environment. There's a branch, for pre-reroute. That's hard to say, MIQ. Anyone using those scripts, you could still use them in the new environment, and they're now available. That's it.
All right. So that's the full sprint demo. Thanks everyone who wrote. Thanks to all the engineers who kind of wrote the code, and thanks to everyone for putting together this sprint report. With that, I'd like to turn it over to questions on the phone or in the chat room in BlueJeans. John Hardy, thanks for the compliment. All right, well, seems awfully quiet. So we'll get back to work, and we'll come back in 3 weeks with the sprint, I guess, 28 report. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.